Well, hi everyone, and thanks for coming. What I'd like to do is close my lectures on case control study design by talking about one other way for selecting controls when you're doing a case control study, and it's called RiskSet Sampling. Basically what it involves is a form of matching. Matching is a topic we're going to be talking about in 2 weeks, but you'll learn more about the general principles of matching at that time. But what we're doing here is essentially we're matching cases with controls who were matched by the follow-up time, the amount of time each was in this follow-up study, this underlying cohort study. Now, this type of RiskSet sampling is very common and very closely related to another type of analyses that Marcello is going to be teaching you later in the course, known as survival analysis. And so you'll see the same principle happening then. But what RiskSet sampling means is what we're going to do is when we select our cases, we're going to take into account the time during the cohort study in which that individual became a case. Now, the risk set for that case is everybody who else was in the cohort study at that time and was at risk for becoming a case at the time the case became a case. So again, we're selecting controls from the source population, but now the source population is unique for each case. The risk set, the source population for a case, is going to be defined as everybody, the subjects who were at risk for becoming disease, becoming a case at the time that the case became a case. So let me try to show you that in an example in a minute. And as I said, this is appropriate and very similar to survival analyses and how we analyze survival data. And like many case control studies, it's going to give you an exposure odds ratio that's going to be interpreted hopefully as a rate ratio, an incidence rate ratio that would have been calculated if you had the underlying cohort study in detail. But here's the description of the risk set sampling. Let's suppose the underlying cohort was open. Let's suppose all these lines represent people who were followed during time, and the X's represent people who became a case. So in the very top person, this person became a case of your disease at that particular point in time. So what we could do is look at that particular point in time, the time in which that individual became a case, and look at everybody else who was in the cohort at that time. Those people were at risk for becoming a case at that particular point in time, the time that that particular case happened to develop the disease. What we're going to do with risk set sampling is we're going to select controls from that risk set that corresponds to that individual case. So what we're doing is selecting a control who was followed for the same time. The case was followed when the case became a case of disease. So what we could do is we could select individuals. Let me move to the slide. Here's that person who became a case again. Here's his risk set. We're selecting, in this case, a couple of people, 2 controls that were at risk for becoming a case at that same time. So what we end up having in our data set are a case with 1 or 2 controls, this picture suggesting 1 control per case, who each control shares a characteristic as being selected from the risk set for a specific case. So our data set is going to contain a bunch of cases and a bunch of controls with that characteristic. The analysis of that involves something called a matched analysis. You'll learn a little bit about that in this course. And it's very similar again to what we do with survival analysis. It's another way of selecting controls. So that's all I wanted to say about risk set sampling, and that's all I wanted to say about case control study design. So to summarize where we stand now, we've talked about 4 different study design options for epidemiologists. We've talked about cross-sectional studies, experimental studies, cohort studies, both retrospective and prospective, both open and closed. We've talked about case control studies, nested case control studies, case cohort studies, density type case control studies. These are all the study designs that we epidemiologists use to explore associations between potential causes of disease, risk factors in disease. What I'd like to do in the remaining portion of this course is now talk about some of the analyses that we epidemiologists do. And first, to introduce that, we have to go back and talk about this concept of confounding again. In further detail, define what a confounder is and talk about how we epidemiologists use data to adjust for confounding in the analysis stage. So that's going to be the next series of lectures I have. See you next time.